Just after midnight on Saturday, August 16th, Simi Valley Sherry tried to escape, but was caught by the family. A few hours later, police descended on Spahn Ranch. The raid was no small affair. The police knew about Crow's shooting in July, knew about Bobby's connection to the family and his arrest for murder, knew about the Reseda rape case against Manson, knew this had become a second home to the drug-dealing outlaw Straight Satans, plus the weapons, plus the drugs, plus the underage kids, plus the stolen cars. They knew Charlie's history and record. Police were very aware from Kitty's stories that Manson and other family members were armed and dangerous. They even knew about Helter Skelter, although possibly not by name. According to the search warrant, affiant William C. Gleason, a 10-plus year deputy sheriff with LASO, the Los Angeles Sheriff's Office, stated that he had probable cause to believe that there were stolen vehicles and stolen automotive parts on the premises of 12,000 Santa Susana Road in Chatsworth, aka Spahn Ranch. The primary suspect was Charles Mills Manson, aka Chuck Summers, registered as 5'7" in height and 140 pounds. He was actually a good 4 inches shorter. The stolen items included a frame for a Volkswagen Beetle, as well as engines, transmissions, plus automatic pistols and rifles, all believed to be stolen property. Gleason flew over Spahn Ranch in a helicopter on or around August 1st, along with a Sheriff Douglas and Officer Lee. Officer Lee later attested that he spied a 1969 Volkswagen lying in a ditch south of the ranch, and that the Volkswagen was believed to be from the Dick Joyce VW agency in Van Nuys, reported stolen on July 15th, when Mary Bruner took it on a permanent test drive. The officers were advised to conduct the raid during evening hours to reduce the possibility of injury. Enforcement from several agencies gathered in Chatsworth at 2 a.m., arriving at the ranch just ahead of 4 a.m. that morning. But did Charles Manson himself actually know the raid was coming? According to Lynette Frome's memoir, I didn't ask how Charlie knew it was coming, but a couple of years later he said something to the effect that he had orchestrated it. This also begs the question, was Charlie an informant? Just like in the case of Mr. X, did Manson himself allegedly feed information to police to get rid of a rival or thin the herd? When deputies arrived at Spahn Ranch, they knocked on doors and ordered everyone outside. They could hear people moving around inside the buildings, but nobody came out initially. Finally, they entered the structures and apprehended the suspects. Police were careful to isolate the building where it was believed most of the dangerous weapons were being stored. Ed Saunders wrote, "It seemed surreal. Everybody was arrested and placed in a circle. 2 helicopters whirred overhead. One of the dogs was running around wearing a brassiere placed on it by someone in the family." According to Gleason, "I really didn't pay much attention to Manson. We'd already taken most of the adults out, and everyone was saying, 'Where's Charlie?' He was hiding under one of the buildings. The deputies had to go in and forcibly remove him." When the police showed up, Charlie and Stephanie were sleeping in the Rock City Cafe. Awakened, Charlie tried to run, crawling under the porch, but he was spotted, and a bunch of stolen credit cards fell out of his pocket when he stood to give himself up. The Volkswagen stolen from Dick Joyce in Van Nuys was located. The search warrant was read and displayed to George Spahn, owner of the property. Danny DiCarlo then reached for a loaded .45 automatic handgun on one of the officers and was charged with assault with a deadly weapon. Charles Manson was charged with burglary for the stolen vehicles and parts. Also arrested that day, Johnny Swartz, ranch hand, Sandy Good, gave name of Sandra Collins Pugh. Leslie Van Houten gave alias of Leslie Sue Owens. Nancy Pittman. Larry Eugene Craven, ranch hand. Barbara Hoyt gave alias of Barbara Wire. Stephanie Schramm gave alias of Carol Matthews. Patricia Krenwinkel gave alias of Mary Ann Scott. Ruth Ann Morehouse gave alias of Ruth Ann Smith. Patricia Joan Baldwin gave alias of Shirley Amanda McCoy. Lynette Frome. John Leo Flynn, Juan, ranch hand. Robert Milton Reinhard, straight Satan. Steve Grogan gave alias of Grant Mullen. David Brian Hannum, ranch hand. Laura Ann Shepard, alias Julia Roberts. We know little about this woman, but her arresting information shows her date of birth 4/4/1951, 5'7", brown hair, blue eyes. She was a runaway. Susan Atkins gave alias Sadie Mae Glutz. Sherry Cooper gave alias Ruth Ann Hoylehorst. Kathy Gillies gave alias Patricia Ann Burke. Vern Plumley gave alias Vern Edward Thompson. Lawrence Giddings gave alias Larry Jones. Catherine Scher gave alias Catherine Ann James. Kitty Ludesinger gave alias Catherine Lynn Drake. Herbert Townsend Jr., probably a ranch hand. Along with the adults, the following children were detained. John Friedman, 10-year-old son of John Partee Friedman. Zizo Z.C. Zadfrak, 10-month-old son of Susan Atkins. Valentine Michael Manson, 16-month-old son of Charlie and Mary Brunner. Dennis DiCarlo, 17-month-old son of Danny and Miriam DiCarlo. Tanya Kasabian, 18-month-old daughter of Linda and Bob Kasabian. The family was so scuzzy that morning that the cops made everyone take a shower. If you look at the mug shots, you'll see that some of them still had wet hair. They were all rounded up and carted off to the local jail. Some of Mr. X's hippie friends were held during the raid but not arrested, even though allegedly they were the subjects of a separate drug raid at the ranch probably about 3 or 4 months before. The August 16th raid was the culmination of 4 months of investigations. Multiple law enforcement agencies were involved. Hundreds of officers showed up. Yet in retrospect, the raid seems half-assed. Preston Goolery, former deputy sheriff at the Malibu Sheriff's Department, which aided the LASO in the August 1969 raid, was interviewed later by writer Paul Krasner for his 1993 biography. Goolery told Krasner, "We had been briefed for a few weeks prior to the actual raiding of Spawn Ranch. We had a sheaf of memos on Manson, that they had automatic weapons at the ranch, that citizens had complained about hearing machine guns fired at night, that firemen from the local fire station had been accosted by armed members of Manson's band and told to get out of the area. We had been advised to put anything relating to Manson on a memo submitted to the station, because they were supposedly gathering information for the raid we were going to make. Deputies at the station started asking, why aren't we going to make the raid sooner? I mean, Manson's a parole violator, machine guns have been heard, we know there's narcotics, and we know there's booze. He's living at the Spawn Ranch with a bunch of minor girls, in complete violation of his parole." Deputies at the station quite frankly became very annoyed that no action was being taken about Manson. My contention is this: the reason Manson was left on the street was because our department thought that he was going to attack the Black Panthers. We were getting intelligence briefings that Manson was anti-black and had supposedly killed a Black Panther, the body of which could not be found, and the department thought that he was going to launch an attack on the Black Panthers. I bet those memos are no longer in existence. It shows the police were conscious of the fact that he had these weapons in violation of his parole. You've got at least involvement here on the part of Manson's parole officer, on the part of the sheriff's department, probably the sheriff himself, and whoever gave him his orders. Manson should have been imprisoned long before the killings because he was on parole, period. He was living at the Spawn Ranch with an outlaw motorcycle gang. The raid was a week after the Sharon Tate thing, and the intelligence information was coming in for about 3 weeks prior. They just didn't want any arrests made. It was obvious they wanted the intelligence information we were gathering for some other reason. It appeared to me that the raid was more or less staged as an afterthought. I never had the feeling the raid was necessary or that it required so many personnel. Now, if you were a police official and you were planning a raid on the Spawn Ranch, utilizing 102 deputies and helicopters and all that, one would think that with all the information coming out a month prior to the raid, wouldn't you have them under fairly close surveillance? If you did have them under fairly close surveillance, wouldn't you see them leave the Spawn Ranch to go over and kill 7 people and then come back? So the hypothesis I put forward is either we didn't have them under surveillance for Grand Theft Auto because it was a big farce, or else they were under surveillance by somebody much higher than the sheriff's department. Either they were under surveillance at the time, which meant somebody must have seen them go to the Tate house and commit the killings, or else they weren't under surveillance. You have to remember that Charlie was on federal parole. Do you realize all the shit he was getting away with while he was on parole? Now here's the kicker. Before the Tate killings, he had been arrested twice for statutory rape. Never got imprisoned for parole violation. During the Tate killings and the Spawn Ranch raid, Manson's parole officer was on vacation, so he had no knowledge of Manson being incarcerated, so naturally Manson was released. But why wasn't a parole hold put on him? Seriously? This is incendiary information from what we believe was a reliable source. If the family was going to kill a few Black Panthers, maybe the cops wouldn't be in a rush over a few stolen cars and jailbait runaways? Or worse, murder? Even if they didn't know about the killings in Benedict Canyon and Los Feliz, their ineptitude was immense. The Los Angeles Sheriff's Office was inches away from discovering the perpetrators of the greatest crime wave in recent history, and instead, they botched it. Kitty was among those arrested that early morning. The LASO knew that she was Beausoleil's girlfriend, that he was in county jail on a murder rap, and that Kitty was telling the police all kinds of horror stories about the family. While Kitty was in custody, Sheriff Gleason called her mother. Mary Ludesinger did not know where her daughter was and had reported her as a runaway. But wouldn't Gleason, who headed up the August 16th raid, have known that Kitty was among those taken into custody? He had met her twice in the 2 weeks prior. Instead, an APB was issued for the pregnant teen in connection to the murder of Gary Hinman. Was there a reason that Kitty was suspected of being involved in Gary's death? Did someone indicate that Bobby was not alone at Hinman's, and police just naturally suspected Bobby's girlfriend? Meanwhile, Kitty was released with the others on the 18th when it was discovered that the warrant date was inaccurate. Of all the stupid reasons why these criminals were released, it boggles the mind that the police spent months building a case only to misdate the fucking warrant? There are many who have discussed and written their theories of why Manson and the family were allowed to run amok, committing crime after crime, including author Tom O'Neill, whose recent book, Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s, attempted to align Manson with a CIA operation which planned to use a group of violent hippies to discredit the counterculture movement. Fascinating as these theories may be, this author found no conclusive evidence that the malfeasance on the part of law enforcement was anything other than ineptness and lack of foresight. Many will remain skeptical, and I remain open-minded about why Charlie and the family were not dealt with appropriately, either before or immediately after the murders, but I truly found nothing verifiable to link Manson directly to Chaos or MKUltra or any other covert plan. I just found a lot of bungling cops tripping over evidence. Preston Guillory, the former deputy sheriff quoted above, gave those comments to writer Paul Krasner, a counterculture journalist who went to rather extreme lengths to write about the Manson murders, including dropping acid with Squeaky, Sandy, and Brenda. Guillory was dismissed by the Los Angeles Sheriff's Office shortly after the family were arrested in the fall of 1969, and he spent the next 2 decades in rather rancorous feuds with various police departments around Southern California, none of which had anything to do with the Tate LaBianca murders. We don't know the reason why he lost his LASO job. Does this author remain suspicious about why the family were released on a warrant technicality and then apparently surveilled but not rearrested? You bet I do. Do I think that the cops wanted the family to attack the Black Panthers? I suppose it's a possibility, one that I certainly never found any concrete proof of. Do I suspect the police were willing to let the 7 Tate LaBianca victims get brutally massacred just so the family could do the dirty work against black militants that they themselves weren't willing to do? Fuck no. After their release, the family returned to Spawn Ranch, but George was unhappy. They'd brought down the fuzz. The rancher was now committed to the idea of selling. Although the teens and adults were released, the children were placed with social services. Linda called the ranch after the adults were freed, trying to find Tanya. Linda did not talk to Charlie, but she did talk to one of the other girls. She believed, but was not sure, it was Squeaky, who told her about the August 16th raid. Tanya, she learned, was now in a foster home. Linda also spoke to Patricia, Katie saying something to the effect, "You just couldn't wait to open your big mouth, could you?" In Death Valley, on August 18th, the day the family was released, Tex confessed to Diane about the murders. She was horrified, but stuck there with Watson and Hugh Rocky. Following their return to the ranch, Manson dispatched Leslie and Pat to Fountain of the World. Later, the Fountain denied that they sheltered the 2 murderers, claiming they turned the women away, but it does appear that they did hide out there for at least a couple days. 4 days after Charlie and the others were released due to a date error on the warrant, police returned to Spawn Ranch. They found Stephanie and Charlie together, both nude. Manson had what appeared to be a joint in his hand, and he was arrested. But why did police return to the ranch? Were they checking in on their suspects or planning other actions? Why didn't they just get a correct warrant if the family were still suspects in the grand theft auto and other charges? The cops arrested Manson, still apparently clueless about his role in the murder spree earlier in the month. Even though the police determined that the joint was merely a hand-rolled tobacco cigarette, not illegal contraband, Charlie was not released for 3 more days. Clearly they wanted him in their custody for a few days. Why? And why then was he released if he was the alleged ringleader of this group of car and drug thieves, drug dealers, and the like? While Charlie was in jail, Tex brought Hugh Rocky back to the Fountain, where his mother Ann Todd was living, and then he returned to Spawn Ranch. He left Snake in Independence, where she was later arrested for shoplifting food. Bill Van Sickle returned to Spawn Ranch sometime between the raid and August 25th. Van Sickle and Vern Plumlee drove to Portland, Oregon that week, bringing a woman named Diane Von Ahn back with them. Vance, Plumlee, Von Ahn, and a man known as Ed Bailey, perhaps Larry Bailey, true name Lawrence Giddings, rented a house in Burbank. Van Sickle, Plumlee, and new family member John Philip Hott, aka Zero, were driving around San Fernando Valley that August, holding up gas stations. They used Wendy Buckley's pickup truck without her permission. Buckley was pulled over by police after an APB was issued on the vehicle, and thankfully proved she was at work during commission of the crimes. but when she realized what happened, she tore into Bill. Van Sickle said something to Manson, who showed up at Buckley's house and punched her so hard that he broke her jaw. She had a gun in her hand at the time and tried to shoot him, but it failed to go off. Buckley was in the hospital for several days and visited there by Shorty Shea. With her jaw wired shut and a face purple with bruises, she was unable to explain what happened, but her roommate told Shorty what Charlie did. Buckley believed this contributed to the ranch hand's brutal murder just a few days later. And to her dying day, Buckley wished to God she could have fired that gun and killed Manson before he destroyed so many lives.